Northwest Center. His work focuses on building relationships and empowering community residents, specifically in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood. In 2019, Jeremy and the youth in the community rallied around the idea of improving public transportation in Belmont-Cragen. With the support of Active Transportation Alliance, which provided hard data for the Youth Council to analyze, they were able to hold meetings with Senator Durbin, Senator Duckworth, and their local members of City Council to discuss how to improve public transportation in Belmont-Cragen. The Youth Council was awarded $10,000 from the Bright Promises Foundation and $20,000 from Divvy to support their efforts in the community. Jeremy is joined by Zaire Menjivar, a youth organizer with the Northwest Center, and he'll introduce him later in the program. Lastly, Vicki Barrett is a transportation planner at CMAP. She's worked in sustainable multimodal transportation design and planning for almost 2 decades. For those of you who don't know, multimodal just means different things like buses and trains. Vicki's current work is devoted to improving travel safety while expanding mobility for all travelers, and especially vulnerable nodes in the Chicago region, using a comprehensive safe systems approach. Through improved design, policy, education, and collaboration, she hopes to contribute to a more equitable, livable, and safer region. So our panelists will briefly share how their work addresses the questions we'll be discussing today. To our audience on Zoom, as I mentioned, please put your questions in the chat and we'll try to get as many as we can during the discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Jesse so he can share a little bit more about his work at the Department of Transportation and Highways, DOTH.
Thank you so much, Alex. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Next slide. All right. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate getting to participate in this discussion on behalf of the Department of Transportation and Highways and on behalf of President Preckwinkle. Next slide. We've had a long-running focus on improving racial equity in pretty much every facet of our work at Cook County. And under President Preckwinkle's leadership, a lot of what the county does is really aimed right at structural inequalities, from unequal health outcomes that are being addressed by Cook County Public Health and Cook County Hospital, to the way that the county's Justice Advisory Council does grant making for gun violence prevention, to just getting the house in order by doing things like creating a racial equity leadership council. So in the past year, the county has really put a finer point on that by creating a $50 million equity fund. And what you see here on the screen is an excerpt from the county's equity fund report from April and back in April of this year, which really goes through all the different kinds of investments that the county plans to make, from criminal justice to worker protection to something that I'm involved in closely, which is transportation. Next slide. So I'm going to talk real quickly about 2 of our signature transportation programs and how they prioritize equity. First, we have Invest in Cook, which is an $8.5 million a year program to help communities build critical transportation infrastructure. Alex said a little bit about it during my bio, but what we do with this is we really try to prioritize the communities that need the infrastructure the most. So what that means is that about half of our awards, or more than half of our awards, have gone to low to moderate income communities. Traffic safety really factors into the program. When we evaluate roadway projects, we look at crash rates. For bike and pedestrian projects, we really try to assess the risk that non-motorized users face from traffic nearby to gauge how much different projects will help them. And then we also try to understand who the benefits go to, which means that we do an equity assessment to understand the racial, to understand where the impacts of the project go. That goes into scoring the program. And in the end, this funding is really a chance for locals to do projects that make roads safer as well. We really have a strong focus on getting this money to the communities that need it most. Next slide. Second big example that I mentioned earlier is the Fair Transit South Cook program. That's a partnership between Metro and Pace Suburban Bus and the county to reduce fares on the Metro Electric and Rock Island lines and increase service on a key South Side route, which is Route 352. The point of this program is really to address the fact that Metro fares have been unaffordable to lots of households in South Cook, not just South Cook, but particularly South Cook, I should say. So even though Black residents in South Cook have the longest commutes in the region, people for a long time just weren't able to take advantage of the fastest and most direct transit service, which is Metro, just because that service has been unaffordable. this program helps with that by slashing the fares on Metro Electric and Rock Island by about 50%. Next slide. So coming around to the topic of traffic safety, I think you probably already know, if you've tuned into this, that we've had a huge increase in traffic fatalities over the past couple of years, starting probably around 2015. I think when it's Vicky's turn, she's going to show us exactly what those stats look like. And I think on top of that, for years and maybe decades, the chances of being killed or badly injured in traffic have been much higher in Black and Latinx communities than elsewhere, much, much higher. And mostly that's pedestrians who are being killed or seriously injured. It's a big problem, also a complex problem that we're going to be talking about more today, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm just going to mention a couple of practical, kind of concrete things, literally concrete things that we're doing to improve traffic safety. One is doing roadway space reallocation during major pavement rehab projects. The county has lots of these 4-lane highways like you see on the left. It's actually kind of hard to see. Sorry about the resolution there. Got lots of these 4-lane highways with 12-foot lanes and a kind of low median right in the middle. That median really just doesn't do much. So what the county has been doing during major rehab projects is taking out the median and then making the remaining lanes skinnier so that we can get a continuous left-hand turn lane down the middle, which actually both improves traffic flow and makes things safer, because those skinnier lanes slow traffic down, among other effects of this redesign. So the county, on top of this, has also been really successful over the past couple of years with getting grants from the Federal Highway Safety Improvement Program. We're usually getting an award every year or two. So for instance, just last week, actually the state awarded us one of these grants for an intersection on Arlington Heights Road to make traffic signals more visible, to offset the left-hand turn lane so that sight lines are better. And as we do that, all the legs of the intersection are getting new crosswalks, they're getting new ramps, ADA compliant ramps, new PED signals. So those are just some of the highlights of the implementation efforts that we've been doing. I should also say that we're really looking forward to working with CMAP and the other counties. Fingers crossed that we get this grant, but Cook County is going for a Safe Streets for All grant, which is a new federal program under the bipartisan infrastructure law that will be in collaboration with the counties in the region. We are very, very excited to partner on that and are very hopeful that we'll get that grant. So we're looking forward to it. And I'm also looking forward to discussing these issues on this panel. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jesse. Next, we're going to hear a little bit more about the Northwest Center. Jeremy, if you'd like to introduce Zaire and talk about your work and why you're here today.
Can y'all hear me? Well, thank you all for being here and allowing us to share our story. I'm going to set the stage a little, and then Zaire's going to take us home. This project in our community all started with the almost death of one of our youth council members who was just simply riding his bike in the community on a street that had no bike lanes, where he was doored and he broke his collarbone and was hospitalized for about 2 to 3 days. He was riding his bike on Belmont Avenue, really close to the parked cars, because the cars that drive on Belmont ride too close to people riding bikes or scootering now, or whatever the case is. And he was riding really close to the parked cars, and somebody opened up their door. He went flying in the air. And like I said, he broke his collarbone, and gladly he's okay. But this work all started with that incident. And then in Belmont-Cragen, there's 95,000, roughly around 95,000 residents that live in the community, and 27,000 of those young people, of those residents, are under the age of 18. So these young people rely on public transportation. They rely on the bus service. They rely on micromobility options like Divvy or scooters. And they rely on bike lanes, right? Being able to ride bikes safely in the community. So we started these conversations with our youth council and realized that this was a real issue in our community. There's almost 6 miles in Belmont-Cragen, and there was only 1.5 miles of bike lanes, and those bike lanes were barely visible. They weren't well maintained, and they were basically useless in the community. And at that time, we also had no Divvy stations in Belmont-Cragen or on the west side. We had no other ways for students to get around. So we're hearing this from our young people, and we also partnered with Active Transportation Alliance, who at that time was doing a citywide report card where they graded each a community based off of their ward. And within Belmont-Cragen, There's 3 different wards. Out of the 3 wards, we averaged a D- when it came to public transportation with the buses, due to bunching, cleanliness, and on-time arrivals for the bus. And the diversity bus line specifically in our community is kind of like the main artery where a lot of the schools kind of end and start at. And that bus line specifically got an F rating. You have to wait sometimes over 30 minutes for the bus. And then when that bus doesn't come, you have to wait another 45 minutes. And then what are you going to do? You're going to walk to your destination. And if you choose to ride a bike, you're almost at risk of getting hit by either a vehicle that's driving or by a parked car, because you just have to ride closely to the curb because there's no bike lanes. So we decided to spring into action with our young people, and Zaire was the young person that led that charge. We started to lobby. We went to Springfield, Illinois to talk to our legislators. We then flew to Washington, D.C. to speak to our congressmen and meet with them in their office. We didn't want to meet with their chief of staff. We wanted to meet with them. We wanted to meet with them face to face. And out of those meetings came a lot of solutions that Zaire is going to talk about in a few moments. But before I pass it over to Zaire, I think, we're in Racial Equity Week, right? And I think that one thing that from our experience is a best practice for everybody, city, state, in our nation, is in the planning processes, when you're planning things, put the community at the table. Don't inform them later of the decisions that you're being made and see what they think about it. Put them at the decision-making table with you. And that's what we saw that worked best with us, that we demanded to be at that table. We didn't want to hear about the plans later. We wanted to be the ones helping create those plans. And that's one thing that we did, that we actually were able to see happen in our community. So I'll pass over to Zaire, who's a transportation ambassador. He's a resident in Belmont-Cragen, but he's also one of the biggest leaders in our community. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Once again, my name is Zaire, and a little bit about me, like Jeremy said. I have lived in the Belmont-Cragen community on the Northwest Side for a large majority of my life. And with that comes that my roots have been planted in the community. I would always go on my bike to whatever may be, school, work at the time. And I really saw the importance of having a safe and secure bike infrastructure network, because I went to school on another side of the city. I went to school in Roscoe Village, and I saw the disparities from Roscoe Village to Belmont-Cragen on the Northwest Side. And in alliance with the incident that Jeremy mentioned regarding one of our youth members, one of my close friends, we really said, okay, we need to make change. And Jeremy mentioned what was done. We went to DC, we met with Senator Durbin. We went to Springfield and lobbied our state legislators. And throughout all that, we were able to garner support. And like Jeremy said, we were able to have the conversations at the table with the change makers. We were able to meet over many months with CDOT, the Chicago Department of Transportation, and also Divvy. Divvy is the organization that leads the bike share network throughout the city of Chicago. And just one quick tidbit, prior in 2019, the nearest station from my house was 1.5 miles away, walking. And there was a Divvy station a block away from my high school. So there was no way that I could bike from school to my home, because I would have to leave the station and walk 1.5 miles to my house. And that's just not ideal, especially after a long day of school. So the biggest thing, as Jeremy mentioned, was having the community at the table. What we did was we presented to CDOT and Divvy what we wanted to do. We wanted more bike lanes. We wanted a Divvy station, multiple Divvy stations in the community. We wanted an efficient bike network in the Belmont-Cragen community. And we went about doing that by hosting simply community meetings. We had bike rides twice a month. And at the end of every bike ride, we had a big map. That's the map right there. Before it had all the red lines, it was just a map. And we gave each of our residents 2 stickers. One was orange, one was blue. And everybody who was in the meeting, who was at the bike ride after we rode, we gave them the stickers and we said, point on the map where you want a Divvy station and where you want bike lanes. And we left it to them. Some people started putting next to their favorite restaurants. We saw people put it next to their schools, next to the parks, on major intersections. And that was really the start of it. After that, back and forth with Divvy and CDOT, we were at the conversation, and lo and behold, this map that you see now is the finished product that went into effect in 2021. And this shows all the bike lanes in red, and all the Divvy stations are also the red little dots that were planted in the Belmont-Cragen community and also the northwest side.
And Zaire, these are all installed.
Yes, they have been since
It's not just a
installed.
plan no more. It's all
It
installed.
has taken into effect. I believe the last station was installed around August of 2021. So the system has been into effect now for a year, and we have seen the benefits, and we've reaped many great bike rides, and we've enjoyed it. We've been able to access that. And that's all about what this conversation is today, advancing equity in the community. I said it before, I'll say it again. It was a shame that a community like Roscoe Village had the network infrastructure that we so desperately wanted. But through long conversations, through meeting with Divvy and meeting with the community, meeting with our local aldermen and our state legislators, we were able to create this infrastructure that we see today. And just so you see, as of right now, there's 13 miles of bike lanes. Today, if you go to Belmont-Cragen, you will find 13 miles of bike lanes. When, as Jeremy said, when we first started, there was about 1.5 miles. So that's more than a 10-fold increase of bike lanes that are visibly painted, that have just been installed. And in addition to that, I believe it's 20, if not near 20 Divvy stations that have since been installed. There's one now 1.5 blocks from where I live. So comparison from 1.5 miles to 1.5 blocks, I can walk to the station in less than 5 minutes, get my bike and go to where I need to get to. And that just speaks to how we have advanced equity in the Belmont-Cragen community, because about 1.5 years ago, that wasn't possible. And now here we are reaping the benefits of the work that we've done.
Great. Thank you so much, Zaire. I think next we're going to zoom out a little bit and hear from Vicky about some of the regional data that supports what we've been hearing at a hyperlocal level in Belmont-Cragen.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Vicky Barrett. I'm a transportation planner here at CMAP. 2 years ago, I helped the agency start a program dedicated to improving regional traffic safety called the Safety Action Agenda. And I want to share, I unfortunately have to start with some very alarming data to kind of frame the conversation today. This is a map that shows regional traffic fatalities from 2010 till 2021. You'll see that in 2021, we had a 20% increase in traffic fatalities over 2020. And in 2021, it represents a 41% increase over 2019. So a long-term trend that started in about 2014 was really exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic and the change in travel demand. It daylighted a lot of issues that have been at play on our roadways for a long time, including a big equity piece. And it's easy to just run through these numbers, but it's always important to me to kind of stop and pause at those numbers. You know, in 2021 alone, 701 of our region's residents, these are our parents and children and brothers and sisters and neighbors and friends and coworkers, did not come home from their trip to wherever they were going, and left gaping holes in families and workplaces and changed a lot of people's lives forever. It's important to pause and recognize that this is a real personal crisis for our region, and more than just a chart. So I want to continue and show some more data. The next slide shows bicycle and pedestrian fatalities in our region. These modes are particularly at risk to traffic safety issues because they are not protected by a vehicle shell. They often aren't accommodated to the same extent that vehicles are on our roadways. These modes are affordable, sustainable, healthy modes that serve all ages and abilities, and it's really important to protect the safety of these modes. At play also with the safety of bicyclists and pedestrians is also mobility. As Zaire just described, a lot has been done in the name of safety that has created barriers to these modes. And it's really important to talk about safety and expanding mobility for these modes when you talk about them. The next slide is traffic fatality rates by race, and this is for our region. Another very stark daylighting of the issue and how traffic safety is absolutely an equity issue. This chart shows traffic fatality rates per 100,000 people by race for every year since 2015. And please note that 2019 is the year that the most recent data is available for this. The two highest traffic fatality rates in our region are among Black residents and all other residents, which is the way on these forms that captures multiracial categories. So it should be understood as people of color in that category of all other. And those are the two highest rates for every year in this. And we can talk a little bit later about what might be behind this data, but it's alarming. The next slide, I wanted to just talk for a second about the complexity of traffic safety. It used to be described in something called the ease of traffic safety, but there's a new approach emerging called the safe systems approach, which talks about all of the things that we need to create a safe system. There is an equity component to each one of these pieces, and they're all complex in their own way, but I want to focus today on the topics of safe roads and safe speeds, because this is a major issue. Speeding is a major issue for traffic safety in our region. Speeding increases the likelihood and severity of crashes. And the way that we have designed our roads and the way that we have set our speed limits have created have contributed to the traffic safety crisis that we are looking at today. And some of the fixes that we have done to try to improve that over time have not been done with an equity lens. Our transportation network has been designed for speed and mobility, and that has come today at the price of more vulnerable roadway users being killed or seriously injured on our roadways. And finally, the last slide, I want to talk one more second about the role of speed and the importance of the topic. The Illinois statutory speed limit is 30 miles per hour. That means that unless a community takes initiative to reduce that speed limit, it is the kind of default speed limit in our urban districts, in our cities and towns in this region. And that's important because it's quite dangerous to be struck by a car that's traveling at 30 miles per hour. And that assumes that a speed limit is being honored at exactly 30 miles per hour. But as you can see on this graphic, a car that's traveling at 20 miles per hour only has a 10% chance of killing the pedestrian that it strikes. That number jumps to 40% risk of fatality when a pedestrian is struck at 30 miles per hour. So this is the default speed limit in our state, and it is often present in places where there are people walking and bicycling, so they're at risk. And I just wanted to give an example of the types of places that we see that speed limit on the next slide. You know, these are roads like this, where we see bicyclists traveling. There's another picture after this that also describes these are complex urban environments with relatively high speed limits and roadway designs that are intended to support cars driving at 30 miles per hour or above. So it's a topic I'd like to talk more about today. And with that, I'll open it up.
Great, thank you. We have now come to the Q&A and discussion portion. Thank you so much for providing all that background. I'm actually gonna remind everyone who's here online that if you want to ask some questions, please put some questions in the chat and the team will forward them to me so we can ask our panelists. But I have some questions I'm prepared to get the conversation started. I'm actually going to start with Jeremy and Zaire because I was so excited to see how youth not only were centered in this process, but really led the process and how different that is. Having worked in government for a long time and done a lot of community meetings, I know that if you don't try actively to center youth in the process, often it's just the people who are retired who show up to your community meetings, especially if you don't take into consideration time and accessibility. How did you kind of design that? How did you make that happen? What kind of difference did you see by centering youth in the process?
I could start, Zaire, if that's okay. I think that in 2017, our organization created a quality of life plan. And it was before I was there, and there was from the residents of the community, that was something that they wanted as a core value of our organization and our community, that we wanted to work with young people, because historically we didn't work with young people. We started off as a housing agency where we help people, where we still do today, help people who are losing their homes, foreclosure prevention, financial coaching. So historically we never worked with young people until 2017. So when that department was formed, there was no budget, there was no staff. It was just, we want to work with youth. And then it all just came, everything just started falling in place. So then that was when our youth council was formed. And I came on in 2018. Working with the young people, it was just starting from the ground up, right? What do you want to work on? We just started to build relationships with the schools. How are we going to get these young people, right? What are we going to do? So we started to build relationships with our principals in our schools and telling them, hey, we have this program where our students not only can make a difference, but they can get paid for it. So all of our students in our programs currently right now, they get a stipend to be a part of our program. And if you ask anybody of our youth council, you ask Zaire, is it about the money? It's no, but it's just an honoring, right? We honor our young people, and money's important, right? They needed to get around, they needed to buy things, their family's probably struggling. So working with our young people, that's how it all started. That's how it kind of, came about. And you see the importance of it, right? Of, just telling young people how important they are, right? They're constantly, battling their parents, right? Or their teachers, and, not doing this, whatever it is, but just empowering them, right? And telling them how important they are, that they deserve to have a voice. It does wonders. And I think that that's what happened with us. And that's how it kind of started. If you want to share your experience there.
Absolutely. And for me, being one of the young people who really spearheaded this campaign, it was really powerful to me, because prior to my time with the Northwest Center, I never imagined being part of that conversation or being someone who would lead this kind of work. Because, and Jamie can attest to this, we had one negative interaction with one of the aldermen in which he, if I'm being honest, he didn't want to speak to me because I was at the time 17 years old, and I wasn't, an official.
He told him, call my office.
And yeah, and it was
call my office, here's the number.
It wasn't very cordial conversation. But yeah, it was very important to be part of that conversation, because as Jamie and I mentioned, Belmont-Cragen has the highest concentration of youth in the entire city of Chicago, with 1/3 of our residents being youth under the age of 18. And as you can assume, a large majority of these youth don't drive. They're not at an age where they can drive. So they depend critically on the safe passage of walking, biking, if they're at that age. And also, as of late, Divvy and the shared scooters program. So it was very important that the youth were centered in this conversation, because they were the ones who have, will, and continue to benefit from this program. Like you mentioned, the old residents, the seniors, aren't going to be grabbing a Divvy bike and heading to the nearest park, most likely. It's the youth who have to get to school, who have to get home, who have to go to the store and help their mom with groceries. Those are the ones who are really going to benefit from the infrastructure improvements for years to come. By the time these young elementary school students are middle school, high school. They will be the ones who will be using the roads every day to bike or to walk to school, what the situation may be. And one of the really guiding factors, again, the program, the community is very large in youth. And one of our schools, in fact, Belmont Cragen School, elementary school, it is comprised of 3 schools in one building. It's a really big problem that we've had. And Jeremy was part of the organizing work that led to a new school being built. But this school, it's Belmont Cragen Elementary School, Northwest Middle, and a charter school called Christopher House. And they all operate out of one building. So 3 schools are sharing a lunchroom, 3 schools are sharing an auditorium, 3 schools are sharing whatever the need may be. And that only spoke to the need, the amount of youth that we have. We need to make sure that they get to school safely. We need to make sure that they're able to get around safely. So yes, it was very, very important to have youth at the center of the conversation.
And as we wrap up the question, there's a new school being built in Reese Park on Fullerton Avenue that's set to open up next school year. So
Oh, that's exciting. I'm just amazed to hear about the impact this had. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and pose a question to Jesse to zoom out a little bit and talk about strategy and policy. So often what I remember from my time at Cook County, what I've kind of been learning at CMAP is that municipalities, especially in the suburbs, and especially some of those who don't have a lot of money or a lot smaller, they might want to design safer streets, but don't have the capacity to do so, or maybe don't have the planners. So how is Cook County helping with that? Why is that so important?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that can be done for municipalities of Cook County is they can apply for the Invest in Cook program that I mentioned earlier. Again, that's a $8.5 million grant program that's offered through County Department of Transportation and Highways every year. It is a great source of funding to do smaller projects all the way, or to do a piece of a larger project. But really its ideal use is probably to fund some early phases of projects. There's a lot of engineering that has to go into any project that you do. So getting that engineering done for a complete streets project, and that could be adding bike lanes, that could be doing sidewalk project, that could be just pure ADA work to put in curb ramps and ped heads and stuff like that. Get the preliminary engineering done so that you can go after federal and state grants for the larger and more expensive construction phase of the project. And so, you know, to any municipal representatives or consultants on the phone or on the webinar today, Invest in Cook is the annual call for projects is going to be opening up in January. So you could start thinking about doing a grant application right now. So beyond that, though, there are other opportunities for funding that can aid municipalities who are interested in applying a complete streets lens to the work that they do. So the RTA has an access to transit program. You might not necessarily think that that would be about roadways, but it can be. So there are a lot of projects that help pedestrians safely get to transit. Because certainly while transit is a very safe mode of getting around, you're not going to get hit by a car in the bus. It can be a hazardous journey to get to the bus stop or to the station. And so it's a very, very important thing to look carefully at the surroundings of train stations and bus stops. So that's one of the things that the RTA Access to Transit program does. There are other programs that are out there. CMAP has run several programs using federal funding that can be used for some of this. As a matter of fact, communities that have complete streets ordinances in effect and agree to put complete streets elements into their projects actually score a little bit higher, relatively speaking, in the CMAP grant program. So that's a good thing. And then I think one of the big victories for equity in funding that helps bicyclists and pedestrians in disadvantaged communities is what happened in Rebuild Illinois. So that's the capital program that was passed back in 2019. So advocates really scored a victory in dramatically increasing the funding that goes towards the Illinois Transportation Enhancements Program. Went up by about $50 million. And the requirement is that about at least a quarter of that goes to funding projects in lower income and minority communities. So I think not certainly everything that's needed, but it is a increase that's going to be helpful, I think, and it's going to improve safety.
Great, thank you. Before we get to some questions from the audience, I'm gonna ask a question of Vicky, and also ask, before you answer this question, will you tell us a little bit more about what complete streets are for the audience that might not be transportation planners?
Yes, that's a great question. Complete streets describe a street that is safe and feels safe for all users. So it generally describes a process of design that considers all users. It also can describe the finished product, which is a street that contains elements that better serve bicyclists, pedestrians, transit users, other special uses that may be in the area for events, or just basically respond to the community need as much as they do to the standards that are typical of, roadway design manuals.
So complete streets are not just built for cars, is what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
So my question, thinking about safe and complete streets, is actually getting a little bit more into this question of how it intersects with enforcement, because I think what people often think, and what's maybe the most cost-effective thing to do, is to use, for example, red light cameras or speed cameras to deal with traffic safety. But I feel like enforcement also has this inequity built into it. So what's the solution to that?
Yeah, you can't talk about traffic safety without talking about how enforcement plays a role in it. I mean, enforcement is used to encourage better behavior, on paper, but the motor vehicle code has been misused in a lot of ways when it comes to enforcement. And the hope is to better leverage the role of design in enforcing safer operating speeds. So in general, we've built a roadway system that is designed to support higher speeds because we've wanted our roadways to function efficiently and to get cars between locations as fast as possible. So we've built a really wide, straight and flat roadway network, and that encourages higher speeds and generally puts other roadway users, if they're present, at risk. So self-enforcing streets is a new emerging concept that kind of takes the ideas of complete streets, which are roadways designed for all users, and traffic calming, which are techniques that you can include in design that reduce operating speeds to desired operating speeds based on the uses, and creates a product that really informs drivers what the safe operating speed is. So the idea is to reduce reliance on police enforcement of speed by using infrastructure pieces to better cue drivers on what safe operating speeds are.
Is there an example of a street like this that we could think of?
Well,
What's a good example of a complete street?
my go-to example is one that's close to my home. So I will talk about a project that was done on Dodge Avenue in Evanston. This is a roadway that serves the high school. It's on the west side of the city of Evanston. It was a roadway that had pretty high speeds and pretty high, and a couple fatalities. We had a couple bicycle and pedestrian crashes in the early 2000s on that roadway. Through the addition of protected bicycle lanes and the reduction of travel lanes and the narrowing of the travel way, which is something that also reduces speeds, we saw an almost instant benefit in crashes and crash types. So the number of crashes involving injuries dropped, and we saw a slight uptick in things like rear view mirrors or property damage only crashes, which is the point of these types of techniques, to reduce injury and reduce the risk of fatality. And through these design efforts alone, we were able to make the streets safer for all road users.
All right, I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience now. First question: if my community doesn't have any bike facilities, where should we start? Should we make a plan first, apply for some fundings, or just get some paintbrushes and paint the bike lanes on the street today? I love the guerrilla approach. I can't advocate for that officially, but I'm into it.
I think that's a great question. I think me and Zaire contemplated doing that as well. We're not afraid to go to jail. To paint some bike lanes. Did they say bike facilities or?
I
mean-
think it's bike facilities and bike lanes.
Okay. Yeah, what do you think, Taylor? There's a lot of things.
Well, I can speak to on a city level. I can't speak to a county or statewide level, but and on a city level, the first thing that we did was start meeting with elected officials. The biggest thing, our local aldermen, the biggest thing was, unfortunately, we had to do this. We had to convince these people why our cause was important. We had to convince them to align with us in order to better support infrastructure changes or bike lane changes. So the first thing that I would do is simply meet with your alderman, meet with your mayor or state or community, whoever the elected official is for your community, because they have the power to allocate funds to have that take form. And then, of course, you would want to garner support, which is what we did, and garner support from the community. We never want to look back and say, hey, guys, this is what we did. Take a look. We want it to be, we want to do this. How can we work together between the community and the city officials or the department that carries out the work, the Department of Transportation? Yeah, that's all.
I add just one thing from an organizing lens. I would just say recruit like-minded people that, you can't, a city, state, they'll listen to 100 people, but if one person has an issue, it's most likely just one, in organizing, you need many people. So if you don't have anything, you need more people to make phone calls, send emails, agitate, all that. So just surround yourself with people that want the same thing as you.
And if possible, talk to Active Transportation Alliance. They do a lot of the organizing with you. Because I think you mentioned that they helped you with your initiative. Active Transportation Alliance. And then I'll tell you from my history at Cook County, if you can't get your alderperson to talk to you, go to the state representative, the state senator, go to your county commissioner. There's like 12 levels of elected representation. You can find someone eventually who's going to care and meet with you. All right, question 2 from the audience. Making streets safer in our region often requires removing parking or travel lanes for cars and trucks, both of which can spark pushback from residents and elected officials. How can we respond to these concerns without watering down or abandoning necessary safety improvements? I feel like this is a lot of the friction we hear today is in order to make streets complete, they can't always be designed for cars or be car-centric, but people love their parking. What do we do?
Yeah, it's a complicated issue and a longstanding one. I mean, really, it is, we are gaining more and more evidence through built examples of road diets not causing the congestion issues that people worry about. And we're also building evidence of the safety benefits of these types of improvements like the one I just described. It is important to make the trade-offs clear. We talked about the fact that those fatalities are people that are never coming home again. And if we can make small steps and potentially inconvenience, to a small degree, the length that somebody needs to travel between a parked car and a destination, those are trade-offs that are worth making when we're talking about making our roads safer for all travelers in our region. There are exciting projects nationwide that are showing the benefits of improved mobility for bicycle and pedestrian usage. We saw an increase in demand for those modes of travel beginning during the pandemic. And it's sustaining. So there is also a potentially a change in the trip lengths that people are making going forward in time as a result of more remote work and a general change in how we travel around the region, making local trips more viable, which are also more easily captured by walking and bicycling, which, could discourage, driving trips eventually as we move forward. So those are all major factors that, I mean, our transportation landscape's changing right now pretty dramatically. And it's with all of the crises that we have facing us, public health crises in terms of COVID, the traffic safety crisis, you know, the climate crisis approaching, there are a lot of reasons to make these trade-offs and make these modes safer and more enjoyable.
So I think that actually leads into question number 3 very clearly. So question 3 is, IDOT very recently released their strategic highway safety plan. It highlights strategies like road diets and other infrastructural changes that historically have not been popular with IDOT. And a road diet is basically making a road smaller, right? Those who are not familiar. The road itself is not going on a diet. So how are Cook and CMAP working with IDOT to deprioritize the fast movement of vehicles on their large roads? I don't know if you want to tackle this, Jesse.
Well, I can certainly try. I mean, road diets are definitely something that makes sense in certain situations, right? And so you're going to need to look at obvious things like traffic volume. You're going to need to look at safety record. Safety record is going to tell you a lot about what needs to be done at a particular location. But what I'm getting at is the planning and engineering needs to be done at each individual location, because there will be particular factors that matter for the success of any given project, including road diets. So you know, it is a desirable thing as a policy. That's somewhere we want to go. And I think the example that I showed earlier of going from 4 lanes to a 5-lane cross section, or going from 4-lane to a 3-lane cross section, which is something that we've also been doing, it is something that makes a lot of sense. And it is, like I said, a desirable policy goal, but it's not always going to make sense in every situation. So, you know, applying it as a rubber stamp is not the direction that we want to go. It's very, I think, very heartening to see the level of interest in this from IDOT and from other roadway agencies. I think that we really are seeing a shift in the traffic engineering profession overall. And I think that's a very positive thing. That said, I mean, I think we all have work to do. And I think it really, you know, speaking to the community engagement part of this, I think having local champions who are engaged in a preliminary engineering process where there are public meetings, where there are stakeholder engagement avenues, like that matters. Like having those people engaged and helping have the agency's backs when there are people who are concerned about loss of parking, or when there are people who are concerned about congestion, or people who don't want to have bike lanes implemented. All that stuff is real, and I think it helps to have a counterweight from the community who's supporting that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a good piece of advice is to show up to all of your community meetings if you can, and be loud about it. Did you have something you wanted to ask, Cindy? We have a question from in the room.
First, thank you so much to our panelists for being here. Zaire, Jeremy, very much appreciate your time here. Keep doing what you're doing. Zaire, if you didn't know it, you're a planner already. Jesse, we're talking about the Invest and Cook programs and having community representatives, you know, represented at each of these meetings, but I'm wondering, how do we shift the responsibility from being on these community-based organizations and community residents from being more on governments? So one of the things that you mentioned was the Invest and Cook program, and how you are emphasizing distributing that funding more equitably, but beyond just distributing applications and funding, how are you actively getting folks that have not previously applied to the programs to apply? So a big part of the barrier for lots of communities is the language, the lack of accessibility to these programs, the lack of awareness that these programs even exist. So while it's wonderful that the programs are out there, that we're having more of a racial equity lens, that we're even doing, what else did you say that caught my attention? You were doing some type of assessment, and I was an impact assessment. I was hoping you could share a little bit more about that also, because I feel like in government, we're oftentimes more reactive than we are responsive. You know, one of the key examples is so many of the community benefits agreements that we're having community members fight for after the fact, right? And it's like, how can we start to involve people before these, giant developments or infrastructure projects even begin to take place. So I'm sorry, that was a lot of questions, but seeding projects, taking away the wonky jargon to make it more accessible. And then also, it shouldn't take residents that are already having such a difficult time to get our attention on these areas. And to Vicky's point, it really is about the policy. I don't know if you can speak to all that. Sorry.
Yes, Cindy, those are great questions. I think I'm not going to have a perfect answer to all of them. I think partly that's because we need to have a process that, as you say, responds rather than reacts. And, that may mean something that takes a little while to iterate on and get right. I think that for Invest in Cook in particular, we have been trying to make sure that that applicants, particularly communities that are in cohort 4, CMAP language, communities that are lower capacity, any community in that category, lowest capacity category that hasn't applied before, we're going to do outreach to them. And so at this point, I think we maybe have like one community that has not put in an application from that cohort 4 sort of bracket. So I think that's positive. Like every year that we do it, we get a couple more of those applications and then we fund them. And so I think that is a good thing in terms of being able to get that funding and that to those communities and get the engagement, sort of the reciprocal engagement back. I think there's more that could be done if we're not just talking about going to municipal staff, but also to just civilians, for lack of a better term. I think we need to probably get on the radio. We need to do more social media outreach. We need to do more sort of hyper local media, to pick up the patch.coms, to pick up the DNA info, to pick up all that stuff. Outside of that, I think we would be looking for ideas on how to get that message out. And like I said, it's an iterative thing that we want to get better at, and we need partners to do that on. But that said, I think we have had success in broadening the reach of that program over time. Were there any questions there that I didn't address? Okay, the impact. Yeah, so that's really just looking at who benefits from each project. And so some of that is looking at who is likely to use a bicycle project, for example. So we've kind of modeled using some statistical tools, basically like not only who lives nearby, but who would be taking a regional trail to get to this new trail segment that's being proposed as an Invest in Cook project. So really looking at the demographics, the underlying demographics of the users of the facility is really where we want to get to. So it's not just about where it is, but who's using it and who benefits from it. That too is an evolving thing. That's something that that I did back when I was at CMAP some. I think that's something that as an industry we need to get better at, because it is not necessarily easy to do. And I think, there are accuracy and precision issues with all that we want to get better at addressing, but figuring out not just where we're spending the money, but who's benefiting from the project in what way, like that's where we really want to be.
Sorry, I just have a follow-up question to that real quick. So you're doing impact assessments, but then I'm also wondering about negative unintended consequences,
Yeah.
right? So I think, maybe this will resonate with Zaire and Jeremy, where so many people deserve safe and reliable bike routes and transportation routes and all of this. But people have to demand them. And so I think there's been studies that show that when there's bike infrastructure put in place, that it in fact makes a community more desirable and can cause displacement. And so how do you pair that, right? Because you're looking at you're doing an impact assessment, but are you taking into account any negative unintended consequences? The 606, for example, was an asset that the community absolutely deserved, but one of the negative unintended consequences was the rising property taxes, rising housing costs, which in turn displaced many of the community residents where those assets were intended for. So beyond impact assessment, I think it's also really important to bring into that the factors of negative unintended consequences so that the community doesn't have to bear that at the end.
So was this aimed at them? I don't know, but I can say this. I think that there are definitely 606 like projects that are out there. I think most bike trails and bike lane investments are not going to have those kind of property impacts. Now, that's not to just to sort of discount the possibility of it, but I do think that there is kind of a rule of reason to apply. Like if you're doing a half mile of bike lane somewhere, it's unlikely to have big real estate market impacts, like what you're talking about. Where I'm more concerned is probably on the freight projects, is making sure that if there is it is desirable to support good paying industrial jobs, right? And to make sure that we have the goods movement that we need to support the economy in the county and the city and all that. That's a fundamental part of transportation planning. You don't want to do that on the backs of people who are then going to be burdened by the noise and vibrations and worst of all, the emissions from trucks. Right. And so you want to make sure that you're doing projects that increase safety and accommodate trucks without increasing the volume or the emissions or anything of trucks. So that's the kind of thing, that's probably the biggest concern of mine as we're looking at some of those projects, less so the bike trails. And we have to believe to some extent, because these communities are typically putting in the applications, that there is some level of responsiveness between the municipality and the communities that are their constituents. Now, I think that there can sometimes be a disconnect there, but that's something that we want to watch out for as well.
I just want to quickly add, my hope is that as complete streets and good infrastructure become more common and broadly applied, that the equity issue in there becomes less tricky, right? And that infrastructure exists for all of us. The other thing I can't go without saying.
Great point, Vicki. Everybody has it.
Right. It's a great case for that, but we have to talk about the Safe Streets for All opportunity, the federal grant opportunity, because it's an unprecedented opportunity for communities that have been historically disadvantaged and suffer from safety issues. So the federal government is putting $1 billion a year for the next 5 years into equitable traffic safety planning. And it's an opportunity for every municipality in our region. And CMAP is partnering with the counties and as many municipalities as possible to bring some of this safety funding to the region. The evaluation criteria are specifically fatality rates and historically disadvantaged areas. So that's a real priority of our work going forward. And if people have questions, I encourage them to reach out to me at CMAP to talk about them.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time. The Department of Transportation has also put out a racial equity action plan for the first time in history. So that's exciting. Never thought I would see the day, but that's great. So we do have to wrap up, and I'm hoping we can just ask our panelists if we want to maybe go down the row. Where can we find your work? Is there any call to action you want to leave us? And yeah, any last words for today? We'll start with you, Vicki.
Well, I want to, a lot of us are practitioners, and I just want to emphasize the value of learning from people on the ground who live in the communities that we're serving. It has daylighted not just safety issues that you can't find in any crash report or anything like that, but other needs of the community that are just, you can only find out through thoughtful and intentional engagement. So that's kind of my bottom line takeaway.
Just once again, thank you for letting us be here. If you ever want to get some good food, the best food in the city is in Belmont-Cragen. So come over. We're located at 5233 West Diversey, nwshc.org. And yeah.
Yes, and going off of what Jeremy said, if you ever want to see the work, please feel free to bring your bike to Belmont-Cragen and go on a bike ride. Every Friday, we host our community bike rides with the Northwest Center. We meet at Black Hawk Park. I don't have the exact address, but it is on the corner of Fullerton and North Laverne. We meet every Friday. We go on a bike ride for an hour. We highlight the new bike lanes. We highlight the new divvy stations. And it's a great time and we all enjoy it. So if you're ever interested, the invitation is extended. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me here. I mean, it's honestly a learning process for me as well. So I appreciate that opportunity. I think for anyone who's interested in the Invest and Cook program, again, the call for projects is open in January. I strongly encourage you to get out there and give it a try. We do try to make it as easy as possible to access that funding. while still, getting the right evaluation done. And if you want to learn more about our work, I'd encourage you to just go to the Cook County website, Department of Transportation and Highways, and find out more about our programs and our planning work. Thank you.